The Torah is one big story, but it has a lot of poetry. Why is there so much poetry in the Torah, and what is it all about?
What's important is that the poetry is part of the story, meaning it's the characters in the story that break out into poetry about the plot. It's not just that there are good poems that have been added in.
You mean kind of like how a musical isn't just a play with songs, but it's a play where the dialogue stops and the plot is advanced through song.
Exactly like that. The songs in a musical aren't just enjoyable, they add something to the story, and force you to slow down and really think about what's happened in the story so far and why it matters. And usually, these songs happen at crucial moments.
Okay, so when we read the Torah and come across a poem, we need to slow down and think about how the poem fits into the narrative, just like we would do with a song in a musical.
Right. We see this at the end of every literary section in the Torah. At all these major turning points in the story, one character breaks out into a poem, and almost all these poems share the same themes. So we'll look at 4 of them to see what the Torah's poetry is all about.
Sounds good.
We'll look at God's poem in the beginning of the story, and then we'll look at poems by Jacob, Balaam, and Moses.
Okay, cool. What's going on in the story when God gives his poem?
Good question. It's right at the beginning of the story. So far, God had just created a good world and gave humans special command over it. They were supposed to rule over God's creation by trusting his wisdom. But instead of ruling over creation by God's wisdom, they listened to a creature, a serpent, who convinced them to disobey God and decide good and evil for themselves.
Yeah, since humans aren't good at deciding good and evil for themselves, they polluted the world that they were supposed to take care of with evil.
Right. So when God confronts them about what they had done, he speaks in poetry.
I see. If this were a musical, you'd probably have a song at this point. Something major just happened, so it's a good place to slow down and process the impact it's going to have.
Exactly. And the Torah does that through poetry. So in God's poem, he tells the humans what they've lost and what they've subjected creation to. But at the heart of the poem, right when he's telling them how the evil they've polluted the world with is going to have disastrous effects, he tells them he already has a plan to defeat the one who introduced them to evil in the first place, and all of his offspring. He says to the serpent, "I will put enmity between you and the woman, and between your offspring and her offspring. He shall bruise your head, and you shall bruise his heel."
Okay, so this obviously isn't a regular serpent. Not only was it speaking, but there's going to be an ongoing feud between the serpent's offspring and the woman's offspring.
Right, and the battle will only be finished when the woman's offspring destroys the serpent itself.
The poem makes it sound like both the serpent and the woman's offspring will die.
Right. If a human wants to kill a snake, you attack its head. But if a venomous snake bites your heel, it's just as deadly. The poetic image is as the human crushes the snake with his heel, he gets bitten.
Okay, so whatever the human does to crush the snake will be fatal to them both. This offspring of the woman must be a central figure in the story.
Right, he is. After this poem, the whole story shifts to start tracking a specific family line that comes from the woman. It zooms in on the ancestors who are carrying this promised offspring, and our next poems pick up this theme and develop it.
Okay, so the poetry in the Torah reads like a musical. At key moments, a character will break out into a poem so that we have to slow down and process what's going on. The first major poem in the Torah happens right away and is delivered by God. God uses poetry to address the humans who just corrupted the world with evil. He tells them that what they've done will have major consequences, but ultimately, he will send a rescuer who will crush the enemy at great cost to himself.
Right. Next, we'll look at how 3 more major poems by Jacob, Balaam, and Moses all draw on God's poetic promise to send a rescuer, and how together, these 3 poems tell us more about what this rescuer will do and how we can recognize him.